Today I'm going to talk about cables, basic cables, and I'll show how to knit them and give some tips about counting the rows in between the twists of the cables. This sample that I have here has two examples of some basic cables. The one on the bottom has two sets of cables that mirror one another. The twists twist toward each other, like this, or in other examples they might twist away from each other and also be considered a mirror cable. And then in the top half of my swatch, those cables are twisting in the same direction. Both are twisting to the right. So just to keep that in mind. Now I'm going to show you with some knitting how to make such a cable. Now this swatch that I started knitting up is the same number of stitches and the same ribbing pattern or a setup for a cable. And I've got my needles, of course, and then a cable needle here. This one has some ridges in this middle part to hold the yarn while the cable stitches are waiting for their turn to be worked. So I'm going to go over, knit over to where I'm going to work the first cable. Usually a cable is set into a background fabric, meaning that sometimes the cable, which is going to be across these 6 stitches here, has some sort of relief stitching in the background. So it will make these 6 stitches move to the forward. And those purl stitches on either side of the knit rows, or columns rather, will help the cable to stand out a little bit. So I'm at the spot where I'm ready to make my cable, and what I'd like to do is have these 3 stitches be in the front of these 3 stitches when I cable. So what you need to do, and what your instructions will also say, is slip 3 stitches onto your cable needle this way, purlwise. You want to keep the stitches oriented the same way on this needle as they were on your regular knitting needle. And in this case we want these 3 stitches to overlap those 3 stitches, so we're going to bring them to the front. And then your instructions would say bring cable needle to front, or slip 3 stitches to cable needle and hold in front. And then we're going to work these 3 stitches from your regular knitting needle. And then we're going to bring the 3 stitches from our cable needle up, and we're going to work from those, keeping them in their same order as they were, and then just knit off of your cable needle. Like so. And then if you look at this, you can see these 3 stitches overlap the 3 stitches that were here. They've traded places. And then you've worked yourself over to the next column of relief stitches or background stitches. So we'll work those. And then in order to get this set of cables to mirror one another, this time I want the first 3 stitches of my cable to be underneath the second 3 stitches. In that case, your instructions will say slip 3 stitches onto your cable needle and hold in back. So that's just what you do. You slip 3 stitches, hold in back, bring your working yarn in front of your cable needle, and knit the second set of stitches. So 1, 2, 3, and then bring your yarn behind your cable needle so you can knit those 3 stitches that are back here on your cable needle. Keep them in the same order and just knit those 3. Then the background stitches and my edge. Now I'm going to turn my work, and on the way back on this example I'm just going to work the stitches as they present themselves. So my first ones will be purls. I slip the first one, then I'm gonna purl, and here I come to my cable. These next 6 stitches are the cable stitches, so I'm just going to purl those because it's a stockinette stitch cable. And then the relief stitches. And then the cable. Couple of relief stitches. And then the edge. Okay, now I want to show you on this side. You can already see how they're mirroring each other. This cable is leaning this way, this one is leaning toward the other one. I'm going to knit a couple of rows away so then we can talk about how to figure out where to make your next twist so that your cables are spaced apart evenly. So I did a few more rows and I just maintained the same stitch pattern, knitting the knit stitches and purling the purl stitches. And I wanted to just show you how I am going to count how many rows there are from the first cable to the next cable. In the pattern of my first swatch, I cabled every 8 rows. And so what I will do is either, well, in this case, I just want to show you how to count them if you aren't keeping track on a counter or on a scrap piece of paper, or however you'd like to count. You could also count from your knitting. And the way that you read your knitting for a cable is if you slide the extra needle or your cable needle into this opening, where there's my finger, where your cable twists, it has an extra wide spot where you can slide in your knitting needle. And you slide this in, and it will seem like the opening spans the space of 2 rows of knitting. This row here and this row there. So this row, the lower one, is the row of your original knitting before you started your cable. This row is the row that was knit as your cable. So it's the first stitch that you knit from your cable needle after you knit the second 3 stitches. That sounds confusing, but when you're doing it, it will be clear. So this is the cable row, this one here. And then this is the purl back row, or the work back row. This is row 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if I want to work my cables on every 8th row, I need to do 2 more. I'll be right back. Okay, so 2 rows later, I'm back, and now I can double check that I've got 8 rows between my first twist and my next twist. So I slide my knitting needle in here into the opening behind the first twist, and I can remember that this is the row of knitting before the twist, this is the row of knitting of the twist, and then the rows since are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the 7th row on the needle. So this row I'm going to work is going to be another cable row, and in order to keep the cable twisting, I'm going to do the same that I did in this twist here, and the same that I did in this twist here. These two are mirroring each other, so the twists will be opposite each other. So edge stitches, background relief stitches, and then cable number 1 is a cable 6 forward, which means that it's a cable that it uses 6 stitches and that the first stitches of your cable come forward. So sometimes that's abbreviated as cable 6, so C6 forward, or C6F. So 3 stitches forward, and then knit those 3. Bring up your cable needle, keep it in the right knitting order, and then knit those to make your cable. Then we'll do the relief stitches in between. The second cable is cable 6 back, which would be C6B abbreviated, and that means we're going to take these 3 stitches and hold them in the back this time. Knit the second set of 3 stitches, and then knit from the cable needle. Finish the row. So here you go. You can see the cables are twisting on themselves just like you'd like them to be. They don't switch directions, and they are facing one another. So there's this. I'd like to show you some ways that you can also keep track of your rows in between when you're working cables or any chart where you need to keep track. So I have this counter. 0 would be your cast on row, and then each time you do a row you count it off on your click. On the 8th row is when I did my first cable, and then since then you come along and you do 8 more, and then on 16 you do your next cable. So this is just a matter of remembering to click your counter after each one, and then on every multiple of 8 you can remember that you need to cable. That's one method. Then another method that I use is good old pen and paper, or pencil and paper in this case. So 0 is your cast on row. Before I knit row 1, I make a hatch mark, and then I continue so on like this. And then when I get to 8, I know I need to make a cable, so I just mark number 8 like this, and then continuing until the next one. So that's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 is my next multiple of 8, so I mark that one and work a twist on that row. So that's how I keep track with paper and pencil if I don't have my counter with me. I'm also going to take a minute here to plug the benefits of blocking cables. There's my unblocked knitting, and then here is the swatch that I prepared, and you can see how much wider the piece is, for one thing, and the cables look more uniform there. So if I lay this here, I'll slide this one up a little bit. You can see the swatch is, or the original swatch is much wider than my current piece, and the cables are really much more smooth looking and uniform on this. So for the mirrored cables, each one is the opposite from the other, which is whether you hold the stitches to the front or the back are the opposite in these two sets. These cables up here, this one and this one were the same. This is cable 6 back. This is also cable 6 back. And then 8 rows later, I did the same cables again. So you can see that they're twisting sort of together. So if your pattern is asking for a gauge swatch measured over cables, it is important to block that gauge swatch, because you can see that, you know, if I was to measure this piece, it's a good 1/2 inch tighter than this piece. So over the width of a garment or a hat, that could be a big difference. So keep in mind that a blocked swatch with cables is very important. Thank you.